You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
It's a day. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fika. Today, we're welcoming back author, editor, director, and designer Reva Leah Stern, and me, your host, Vicky Benison. Reva's life has and continues to be a full one. She's worked in Los Angeles, New York, Toronto, Chicago, Florida, and Kansas City. As we discussed, the water buffalo that shed her girdle and the Prescott journals during her last visit, we'll be focusing on her work, I Say My Name Today, a mystery revolving around child trafficking. But this isn't the first time Reva's work has taken on relevant and emotionally difficult topics. As we discussed in her first Fika, she has made a habit of it, and a good habit. Without using sensationalism, she is able to take us on the character's journey through their lives and give us the ability to move forward with them. Then, instead of closing our eyes and running away, we are able to see how these happenings infiltrate our own lives and better understand those involved. Okay. She lost the end of her interjection. So, not only do I want to talk about I Say My Name Today, but I also want to interrogate, because we're dealing with mysteries, Reva about how she makes it happen, because her characters are honest, real, they live next door, and they're a part of our lives, and they remain a part of our lives even after she's finished. So thank you, Reva, for the writing you do on so many levels. It works. And welcome to Fika.
It's a pleasure.
It's all mine. So the first question, I guess, is how did you I can't believe that. How people, I threw out the wrong sheets. So we're going cold here with a few index cards. Reva's
It'll be an adventure.
Love adventures. How was I Say My Name born?
Ah, um, there's always a germ of an idea that comes from the unknown, comes from the strangest moment. And this was a strange moment. It was it was a sleety, freezing cold February day. I was meeting a client to discuss editing his book. We were going to meet at a Tim Hortons, and I decided to get there early to prepare some notes. I had read his manuscript, and so I wanted to make sure I had my notes ready. So I got there, I ordered something to eat, and I sat down at a table watching the sleet and thinking. And I noticed a little girl sitting in a corner where two panes of glass converge in the corner of the restaurant, of the coffee shop. She was wearing a coat that was too big. She had no hat, no mittens. The table was empty. I couldn't see below the table, so I couldn't tell whether she had on boots or whatever. But her coat was quite open, and kind of like me, you could see that she did not have a sweater on or anything that showed any sign of warmth or protection against the cold. So my mind began to wander, and I started wondering, who was she? There was always a lineup of people, and in this particular Tim Hortons coffee shop, and I kept wondering which one was her mom or her dad, and the line kept rotating. People would get their order, they would either leave the restaurant with their bundle or they would find a seat. And as time wore on, it was 15 minutes and 20 minutes and 25 minutes. And there was nothing happening. This child was crunched together in almost a fetal position in a little cold orange chair, plastic chair. And I went up to the counter and I asked one of the cashiers or servers to take a donut and a cup of cocoa to the little girl. I said, please put extra milk in it because you don't want her to burn herself. So I said, but don't tell them it's for me. Just take it over and smile and give it to her, to tell her it's for her. So they did that. And the child would sniff at it and then pull back and sniff at it and look at the donut, never touched it. And it took about 40 minutes. And a woman came in, and the woman looked, this is terrible, but she did not look like a very pleasant person. She had very bleached hair with very dark roots, very teased, and lots and lots and lots of makeup, and lots of costume jewelry, and a fake fur coat that came to above the knee, and very high red shoes in this haily, icy weather, and a very low cut. Her coat was open, very low cut. And she walked up to the child and said something in a language I couldn't quite hear, and I couldn't quite make it out, but I know it wasn't English. And she grabbed the child by the upper arm and pulled her off the chair and dragged her out. And then I saw that the little girl had on sandals and no socks, and my heart just dropped. And I could not get that child, the image of that child, out of my mind. It just haunted me. And after a few weeks, I started to just make notes, and I kept picturing this child and began to ask myself questions on my computer. Who was she? Who might she have been? Who might that have been? Where might she have come from? Why was she not? And then in answering those questions, I began to formulate the idea of the book. And that's the beginning. And then you start researching the topic of, either child abuse or child exploitation, or one thing leads into another. And I found myself not falling down a rabbit hole, but trying to claw my way out of a rabbit hole to get to the top so I could find out in the clear air what was really going on. What could I make of this as in my story, in my image of what all of that was about.
So the story became an answer to your curiosity and a way to find out all these details.
Yeah, I guess in a way it was. Well, a story fiction always begins with curiosity.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I guess in a way, yes. And then to apply the right characters in order to bring some resolution or some sanity or some discovery to it, then the other characters had to be created. And then the biggest problem you run into then is what is legal, what is not. I got involved with somebody who worked in child exploitation to be able to ask these questions. I was able to go online. I was given certain sites I could go to get the answers about the law and whatever happened. I'll actually tell you an interesting thing that happened. When I was doing my research, I was given a legal site. And I went on this legal site and I was asking all these questions like, what kind of penalty, what kind of punishment, or what kind of a sentence would one get if one were involved in child exploitation or child prostitution and so on. And I was going through it to find out, because I wanted everything to be right. I didn't want a reader to be able to say, oh, this is ridiculous, this could never happen, or this is not accurate. And as I was looking at it on my computer and going from one heading to another to get the information I needed, this gray square came up on my screen with rounded edges, and exclamation marks, and said that you must cease and desist, remove yourself from this site. If you do not, you could be under investigation. And I closed the site down. I almost had a heart attack. All I could picture was the police coming to my door. I live in a lovely condominium community, and pictured me in handcuffs and the police taking me through the lobby filled with my neighbors. Anyway, I called the person, I don't want to mention names or anything, but it was somebody very high up in the police, and told them what happened. And he laughed his head off and said, it's the timing. I mean, you go to research something, and eventually they start saying, you didn't punch in it. You're not a lawyer. You're not a this or that. So like, why are you looking at all these sites? So this comes up as a warning, just a warning.
Yes, but as a relatively law-abiding citizen, it's a scary warning. And
Very.
and once again, that warning goes out to all family members of a writer or friends that may happen to go on their computer. Really don't check into their search. Just because,
Yeah.
you might fear for your life. You might fear for it's difficult being an author and doing research, particularly on this topic. So I'm going to call him the protagonist, but it really is an ensemble of the characters all contribute, I think, quite evenly. But Michael is also a mystery writer. And he has connections with the police force that help him. Obviously, you have connections that help you in everyday life, in your dramas with the internet. How much did they help you in writing this book?
You're talking about my connections? Or?
Yeah.
Well, just like with the Prescott journals, that one I had a Crown attorney who read my first draft. So, because I wanted to make sure that the legalese was appropriate, and she was wonderful. Actually, when I moved to Toronto originally, my intention was to go to law school, but I got married instead. So I didn't ever end up becoming a lawyer. But she thought I was a lawyer because she said that I had done such a good job, and I thought she was just being patronizing. But she said there were very few errors. But if you're going to deal with the idea of child exploitation, which there was some of that in my Prescott journals as well, you do need to connect with the police and with the legal department so that you have everything, up to date.
Right.
So I didn't have to do much because I had already done a lot of it with the Prescott journals. I had found out a lot because it was a very, very different story, very different circumstances, and really it was ultimately a different kind of different plot. There was a subplot concerning the child exploitation, but it led to many, many other plot lines that took priority. So I was able to check with two different lawyers and the police and get some advice when I was really curious. Can we do that, or is this possible? So they were very, very helpful. Yeah.
So do you just know all these people, or do you go looking for them?
Well, I've been a writer and director for a long time, and a lot of plays I did. I did a play many years ago called oh my goodness, it just went right out of my head. It was about a woman who was raped. I didn't write the play; I just directed it, and I wanted to know a lot about what the law says, what I could do and not do on stage. And I connected with he was a chief, I think he was a chief of police, or I don't know whether he was a chief, but he was with the division that was closest to my theater at the time. And he had become very good friends with some of my staff. So I was able to connect with him at that time Extremities. The play was called Extremities. Actually, they made a movie of it with Farrah Fawcett at that time. And so I stayed in touch, and then he was able to put me on to other people. And I knew a fair number of lawyers, so I was able to find somebody who dealt with different issues that I was
Legal.
Yeah.
More. So it's part of having a full life. You've made these connections over time, and they come in handy in later on, which is one of the benefits, I guess, of being older when you're doing these things, because you've had time to know who to look and up and so think. Okay, Robin says that was a sad story, Reva, about the girl. I really don't understand how people can be so cruel to their own children. And that's the question, right? Because you don't know if that is their child or not. And so it's really difficult for someone to step in and say what's going on here, because you don't know what you're getting into the middle of. Though I may be more apt to do that after reading this book, instead of turning an eye and saying, how is this going to, what am I going to be embarrassed? Am I going to, look like a fool? Just take the opportunity. So without my sheet, you have been a newspaper writer and written for magazines and things like that. And your novels seem to be, I have found them very relevant, very in the now, very. Do you still spend a lot of time with, I mean, I know that you don't like a lot of the stuff on the internet and social media and that. Not that you don't like it, but it's not your thing. So so are you still a newspaper person? Like, do you still read that in print?
I do. I'm very much a news junkie. And finding real news is a bit of a challenge, because there's TikTok and Google and terrible sites that you get all kinds of misinformation and headlines that seem to tell you a story that has no place in reality. But I do try to search for the truth. I try to look at things from all sides. But I'm not a fan of the internet, although we're on it now and I use it every day. But I'm not on any social platforms at all. I'm not on Facebook. I have a website, and I have email, and I Zoom a lot. I run a writer's workshop on Zoom. I do a lot of meetings on Zoom, but I'm just not a fan. And one thing you'll notice about my novels, they never take place today, because dealing with messaging and texting, and I feel like there's a kind of impotency about the dynamics. It may work in movies and on television, but I prefer to write about just prior to this last 10 years of this bursting of technology, or on the verge of it, where you have flip phones, or you don't get a lot of information, or if you do, it's pretty inaccurate, or it's pretty unreliable. It's still unreliable, but everyone thinks it's reliable. And but so I like, you and I were talking a bit just before we went on live, and about the fact that it's hard today to add dynamics, physical dynamics in particular, to your actions. Like you were talking about, in the good old days, you could take a receiver when you were angry and slam it down. And I agree with
miss
you.
that.
Yeah. And you said, now you just push the button. Well, that's true. There are many things like that. Like you don't answer a door anymore. You push a button, and when somebody rings your doorbell, you can see them, and you push a button and say, yes, who is it? Or, what are you doing here? In the good old days, you'd open the door with a smile and say, yes, can I help you? So there are a lot of those interactions that don't happen anymore. And I prefer to write, I try anyway, to keep whatever I'm doing in a place where there's good, I won't say old fashioned because I don't write about the 60s or 70s.
No.
But just able to interact with people as much as possible and read faces and read body language.
Yes, you don't have to go to. Well, I guess it would be the good old days for some of the younger people now. But say you take a series like X Files or Criminal Minds, you can see the change in technology from the first season to later in the seasons. Like that's how fast it's been. And there is, I love my tech. Like I said, I couldn't speak to you. I might not have ever met you if it wasn't for Fika and the internet, and so it has a lot of good things. But as far as writing mysteries, I think it's like you said, you see who's outside the door before opening it. Like that just took half the suspense right there. Like there's a knock, urgent knock on the door. Like, as a reader, you're thinking, who is it? What's happened that I can relate? You're trying to figure that out before the character in the book opens the door. And then you're like, okay, I won. Or what a shocker. Is you're missing those things that make people real, and the ability to cover things up um is so much easier. You think it would be more open, but people can change the way they look. They can, catfish and do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have that personal touch, I think, perhaps. Even without AI, we were moving in that direction before that all started. That so as a writer, you have chosen to just fall into that little niche. Not when we didn't have anything like this, but before it became so invasive in our lives.
Right. Around, I think it was around 2015 is when it really got very heavy into technology. But there are other things that there are devices now that we didn't have before that time that are quite wonderful. Like you have technology that can find a body 3 feet under the earth, somebody who is buried that you could never have found before unless you dug up the entire forest. But you can, so those kinds of things. I'm working on a series of short stories now for a collection for publication, and those things now I can take advantage of. I can use that technology in a short story where it doesn't involve the same kind of character building. It's more very instant plot building. So using technology now is to my advantage. But I just find that a lot of technology is a shortcut. It leaves out so many details that are so delicious and delightful for the reader, and you just go to the technology. Well, let's just hit the internet button and see, or the social media button, and let's see what we could come up with. It just isn't the same.
Although Garcia is still adding excitement on Criminal Minds with her computer knowledge. But you don't, yes, it's not the same as someone rushing to give somebody information when they can just they can just call them. So there isn't that rush. There isn't, I mean, there is, and I don't think it's just an age thing. I'm sitting here worrying this is an age thing. Isn't me. But yeah, I think there is definitely more room for that dark, rainy night in the dark house before, because you couldn't get electricity. I mean, that's why even now a book written during the time period of the 19th century, a horror story, will be scarier because there are no lights to turn on, right? Those shadows are permanent. There's no escape from them. So that is. And speaking of Criminal Minds, because I also think one of the ways you make your characters more real to us is by throwing in some pop culture, some television, any of those things that make us, for example, I'm just going to go for the example because I still have that because that was on an index card. Okay. So Claire says, I was watching Criminal Minds when you drove in. So maybe that's why I got spooked. Now this first immediately makes me care about Claire because I am, and I also relate to her because there's no way I'm walking out on a dark night down the street after watching Criminal Minds. Okay, so it gives you that idea to begin with, and I find that you do that often. Not often, like too much, but you will throw those things in there. For example, where Dora got her name or whatever. I don't want to tell the whole story, but do you do that on purpose or is that just part of your natural writing?
Well, it's intentional, but I never thought of it I've never thought of it in those terms as to whether it's part of my natural writing. I think it's just the way the way I see people speaking and relating. That's that in that time, Criminal Minds was very hot 10 years ago, and so the reference would be Criminal Minds, or would be the program that you referred to concerning Dora. These things were just relevant at the time, and so it seemed logical in order to make like I wouldn't have made the reference necessarily about I was watching some vampire show from 1950s.
No, because it wouldn't be relevant to that.
So I want it to be relevant so that it confirms the era, the time in which this is happening.
And Claire becomes our next door neighbor because, Yell Over the Fence. Did you see the episode? Or, in communication with her husband, that explains why she's feeling uneasy. It's not that something real has happened. She just was watching Criminal Minds and that makes her uneasy. So
on the other side of that, though, now because of social media and because of streaming, you could be watching Criminal Minds for the first time in your life right now and believe that it just started right now.
This is how I know that the tech at the beginning of the show, it grew so quickly because I've watched it quickly. Okay. I love that show. So, Claire's okay with me. She just and I think it does make you feel close. I mean, I know that if I read a book and because I'm Canadian and they mention Tim Hortons, I'm like, oh yes, right. I remember. I can relate to that. That is relevant to my life. So it's not that we're not sometimes looking for something new, but when we're building that understanding of that story, it's nice to have some comfortable steps along the way where you can stop and say, okay, I'm comfortable here. I like Tim Hortons. Now let's go to the next step of the mystery.
But I'll tell you something interesting about the point you just made. A number of years ago, when I first started the first draft of the novel, I had an agent, and the agent said to me, you cannot make references to Tim Hortons because Americans won't know what that is. And I said, so? It is a coffee shop. They know what a coffee shop is. Yeah, but you're making it sound as though Tim Hortons is so I couldn't mention Tim Hortons at the time. So there were rules. There were also rules where you couldn't actually describe an automobile. You had to just talk about the color of it or the shape of it years ago. You couldn't say it was an Oldsmobile, especially if it was involved in a crime. So there are things that it wasn't illegal, but it was frowned upon, and the companies didn't like it. And if you were looking for product placement, or you're looking for advertising, or you're looking for sponsorship or investors, you didn't want to insult anybody. Nowadays, everywhere you look, there's product placement on television and in movies.
They
it's
learned.
mandatory.
They learned. It doesn't matter if the villain is driving your car, as long as the little sticker on your car with the name on it is placed.
Today, yeah, yeah.
It doesn't have that same feeling. So I have said, and I want other people to read this book so they can tell me what they think, but I have said that this is why I go on about them. It's not they're so strong, so real, and that is why I think they can take us through these difficult situations without us and keep us reading. Okay, because it's very easy to close a book and say, I can't deal with this, and it's gone. But you sidestep the sensationalism. It's because we don't see it through the bad guys, the perpetrator, the creepy ones' eyes. So we're not getting that yucky value. We're not seeing it through the victim's eyes, so we're not getting the impact of that emotion, that pain so dead on, and we are seeing it through the people who care about them, the people on the sides and their empathy, so we can look at them with empathy. And I think one of the ways that is done is through your strong characters, because they're real people, and that could be us seeing that little girl in the restaurant, finding that little girl in the restaurant. Um, and as such, because you're so fantastic at making these characters and making them real, um, do you, because I'm going to go back here because I'm right in the middle of this show right now. Do you think that an author could be considered a character profiler? Because you're looking into their life as a whole, even though we only see parts of it.
Um, I think that is one of the I wouldn't say it's a responsibility, but I would say that it's one of the gifts that an author offers the reader is a true profile, a true depth to the characters that she or he provides for the reader. Yes, I think it is. I mean, you can't just look at the surface, because the surface is a is is a um, is a skin covering of all that lies beneath. It could be lies. That person may be absolutely charming, but if you don't profile that person and give the reader something more, then there is no mystery. Uh, there's no uh, there's nothing gripping about the story, because you now know, oh, this is a lovely person, or this is an evil person, or so you need to know all the aspects. What is this person capable of? Is what you see what you get? If not, what is underneath? And when will we know it? How will we know it? How will it be served up to us? And when it is, will we believe it? And or will we be shocked by it, or will we
Accept it.
but always will we accept it?
Yes, and you, I'm just saying, you do this so well, so that we get so involved in the characters and their lives that I closed that book saying, "Oh my goodness, I know she's not, but I want a series with these people." Um, because we wanted to know how it continued on for them. And I think in the same way as we took a vacation and met new people and keep up with them with Christmas cards. If I send you cards, will you like send them back to me from like Michael or Claire or Mary and telling me what's up? No. So this unfolding, the continuation of a story gives us security, so that we knew that they were there before, we know that they'll be thereafter. Well, I mean, so not everybody's going to be there depending on the thriller, but there will be a logical reason for it. And this is part of a whole life for the victims and for them. And also the perspective is important, because once that perpetrator is taken care of, arrested or whatever, their story is out of the main character's story, so we follow them. There's no, they weren't worth it. They weren't worth their own story. We're getting rid of them.
Well, after the book came out and people started commenting or reviewing, one of the questions that I was asked several times, especially when I did live interviews at the time, was, "Is that it? Will there be a sequel?"
I can see that.
Yeah, and what, like, what would it hinge on? So I said, assuming that the mystery has been resolved, that that story has run its course, well, those characters, Michael, who's a writer, and Claire, who is an HR person, and Dr. Goldwyn, and
Barry.
Barry Gold, who's a lawyer, a detective, sorry.
Right.
So all of these people,
And
Stewart, yes, police. So all of these people who we grew to to respect and admire and fear
and care for
and care for during this story, really could, they really could move on to a whole new storyline. So it is possible. I don't know if I'm up for it, but because I'm still working on the short story collection, but it hasn't escaped me.
Okay. So I can dream, and I can say, but this is one of the benefits of not doing it right in today, because you can go back in time and you can start like the next day kind of thing. I mean, not that you would start, you'd wait for something to happen, but but whether it's 6 months or whatever, you don't have a reality timeline to work with that. So that would make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
So bringing up, and it had 2 names, but I just had 2 working names. But then in your last bio, you just used the one. So I'm wondering if the strange spectrum of mysterious mishaps. We kind of touched upon it last time, but we didn't speak much about it. And it seems to be completely different, once again, from what you've written before. Is it?
It is very different. It is still filled with kind of nasty little bites of karma and people possibly doing wrong and getting their comeuppance, or being assumed to have done wrong and getting comeuppance where they may not have deserved it. So it's not always all cut and dried and very pat, but they're snippets. Some of the stories are as short as, I don't know, 10 pages. Some are 25 pages. There are, I think, about 20. I have about 20 stories or 25 stories, something like that. So I'm just now, it's not a first draft, because some of the stories I've gone over and over and over again. But it's a matter of deciding which to leave in, which to leave out, which I might, a couple of new ideas have come to me that I might want to add to it. And then finding a publisher, because the same publisher that publishes creative nonfiction doesn't necessarily publish fiction or mysteries, and doesn't necessarily publish short story collections. So that's the hard part.
So that was one thing I knew I was going to ask you, because you said it took 25 years to find the right publisher for Prescott journals. That was a journey. And so aside from doing your research and knowing what that publisher publishes, what other things mean the right publisher for you to you, Reva?
Well, the last 2 books, I Say My Name and the Prescott Journals, were both published by U.S. publishing houses. The first book that I wrote, The Water Buffalo That Shed Her Girdle, was published by a Canadian publishing house. And I'm based in Canada. The Canadian publishing house, for many reasons, it isn't just because it was homegrown. They couldn't have been more wonderful. They took care of everything. I had appearances and book signings and book big book conferences and all sorts of amazing things that they arranged. And I was like on cloud nine. The books were selling like crazy. Everything, but they don't do the kind of books they do memoirs and autobiographies and biographies. So Water Buffalo was a creative nonfiction. So that's what they do. So if I'm going to now do mysteries or thrillers, I have to find a publisher. And when I was submitting, these two different publishing houses in the States both wanted both books. So I ended up with one publishing house 1 year taking one, and then the next year the other publishing house took the other. So having it published in the States meant that the books were more expensive, that they will do very little for you because they don't know the Canadian market, unless you're Margaret Atwood, of course. But if you're not a well-known, well-established mystery writer, even though the people that backed me, I mean, one of the testimonials or
blurbs, the back cover blurbs?
On the back
yeah.
was Andrew Niederman, who writes the V.C. Andrews books, and he happens to be a dear friend, and endorsed my work. That still didn't seem to matter. They did really nothing other than make sure that the book went through the proofing and so on, and with Prescott journals, I got some good feedback on certain little bits and pieces, but other than that, it was mostly about just getting the book done. And it's not like I self-published. I mean, I didn't pay for anything. They did it all in terms of getting the book into print and ready. But they don't have a connection anymore to the bookstores. If in Canada, Chapters and Indigo wouldn't take the book, and I found it just impossible. So when you ask what I'm looking for, I really want to find a Canadian publishing house to do the collection, because at least I stand a better chance of getting it into bookstores, and there might be a life for the book that follows. So it was on Barnes and Noble in the States, and it was on Amazon, and it was in Europe. It was sold somewhere else. In Australia, I think it was sold on Amazon in Australia. But there were a few other online venues that sold it in other places around the world. But it doesn't really mean anything, because I don't have the kind of following that somebody like Atwood would have. So,
which is why we need to. No offense to Margaret Atwood.
No, none.
Say that. I'm saying
I have all her books.
We as a whole, humanity, does not pick up different types of books. I find that with my little free little library. The same authors are read over and over again. And yes, they made it there because they were good authors and they were prolific, and there was hard work and some luck involved, as always. No one's saying they don't work hard, but just for ourselves, picking up something different once in a while is nice. And I try to sort of sort it in my little library. Not that I'm pushing anything. But I tried, if somebody sends a book that is less known, I might go, and put it in the little library. Sometimes I put it on my library shelf first, but my reading list is so long, I have to be realistic and just make it go away to the little library. So it is something that people can look at in themselves to do that. Second of all, it's hard it's harder to do personal appearances. Like they're usually done in large towns. You're near Toronto, right? You're not in the Mecca.
I'm in Toronto.
You're
Yeah.
you're right in Toronto. So that is easier for you to get that. I mean, because you're adorable and people will notice that and buy your book on launches and things like that. So that personal touch is important. And thirdly, regardless of what people think, times have changed and publishers are no longer offering setting you up for these things, getting your name out there. This is why so many authors are trying to write as well as keep up large social networking just to get their book out there. Plus, go to, I mean, it takes everything to get a book out there and known if you're not one of the gods of writing, I think.
And if you're not comfortable with social media, maneuvering it, I'm comfortable being on it. Like I've been invited as I am with you, and I'm willing to do it, but I'm not comfortable initiating it. I'm just not that person, you know.
Well,
So it's very hard for me
there
to.
comes a dilemma because I would say that most people who spend a lot of time reading or writing are by nature introverts. This is what draws them to it in the first place. And excuse me, allergy seasons always. And so then they are being thrown out of their comfy nest where they haven't seen a lot of people into the world, into the whole thing. And it's difficult for them to answer a message. Might take them. I'm only saying this because I know from a friend of mine. I have trouble answering a message because I want to make sure that I say the right thing, right? So I will spend 2 hours on one message, and I'm getting better at that. But it is difficult, I think, to play all the roles that an author has to play now.
Yeah, I mean, I can stand up. I've done lectures my whole career, and I can stand up in front of 1,000 people and feel perfectly comfortable with my subject. But calling someone to ask them to, would they please take my book, put it on their shelves, I find that hard. I did try it. I did ask. I even had friends who don't live right in Toronto take the book to their library, their public library. And the librarian says, no, we only do local authors. You know, if you're not an internationally known author, then you have to be a local author. Like if you're in Mississauga, then you need to be a Mississauga based author. So but in Toronto, uh, some of the people who wanted to bring my book to their library, the librarian said, you have to fill out a form, you have to be a member, you have to do this, and you have to do that. And I have a feeling that some of these people just said, it's too much trouble.
Well,
Just,
it's a lot of it all takes time. It's a
yeah.
lot of red tape, like going out there, doing those things, doing talks, doing when are people supposed to read now? I mean, right. Like and also writers are readers, so they want to do that
Yeah.
too. It's just a lot. Granted, and also which I think is wonderful. A lot of the writers today are older, so they have more life experience, but they're less likely to want to spend okay. They don't have as much energy to be doing all of these things.
I've got the energy. I just need some. Like if I had, like years ago, you could have an agent. You didn't have to, but if you had an agent, so if you had an agent, you just had to show up and then do your
Right,
spiel,
right.
read from your book, give a little talk, sign some books. Everything was great. But so it isn't the energy. And if I had to drag the books with me, I can do that too. I'm strong enough. But the problem is getting those invitations
It's
because
promoting yourself.
yeah.
It is I'm going to say this. I feel that's part of the problem with Canadian authors is that culturally we are Canadians in general, culturally, we are raised to be humble, raised to not push ourselves out there, right? So I think that could be a lot of the problems when I see, there are some people in the States that are like, this is the way it is, this is the way it, I'm doing this, I'm out there, this is good. There are people from other countries within Canada that have come from other countries that are like, I have to push this out there. It's survival. I'm going to make this happen. And for heaven's sakes, even in England, even the UK is getting better at it, I'm thinking, than Canadians. We still are very much, I can't, I can't do this. I need to have someone else bring it forward for me.
I think our young people are much more
Yes, yes.
forward thinking. The young writers are much more forward thinking. I think it's because of social media that they've been able to do it almost anonymously, and they're really much more comfortable, tooting that old horn. So
Um,
than anyone, say, over 35, for example, or 40. That young generation is really very
They've learned because
comfortable.
they're seeing that as a way to behave, and no one is saying, "Don't do that."
Well,
Just
they can
be
do outrageous things on TikTok or whatever, and
right, right.
nobody raises an eyebrow, so they're
There's not
comfortable.
there's nothing you can do that's going to overshadow all this stuff out there. Like it's about getting attention now.
And the other thing is that that say 25 or 30 years ago, before the internet, before everybody had a laptop, before everybody had an iPad, um, writers were still somewhat of a rare breed, like serious
It's the
writers.
number of
Now, everybody who's got a laptop or an iPad or a desktop or whatever, everybody's a writer. Everybody wants to write their book, which is fine. But then every publishing house is inundated. So little publishing houses pop up, and then they have a few good hits, and then it falls apart. If you go online looking for a publisher, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds, and when you check them out, you'll find that hundreds upon hundreds have already gone out of business. So it's an evolving, definitely an evolving door, or a revolving, but it's not evolving. I think I should say it that way, because it's not getting better. It's probably in many ways getting worse.
I think, you know what? I don't want to step on anybody's dream or anything in the world. I think is honest to say is it well, honest would be there's how many people and the percentage of writers out there actually make a living at writing now, because there are so many of them, and those glory days of the 80s and Stephen King coming in and all of these people, that's just a pipe dream now.
Yeah.
So much so that I always wanted to write. I always loved to read. I have like 3 novels in various places throughout the house. But I am very content at this moment to read other people's books and bring them forward, because I would never do it for myself. That's that old Canadian thing coming in. And to bring it forward, because I know by speaking to people the amount of work it takes. I mean, not that this isn't work, but the it's almost it's the impossible dream, really, to get it out. Few people do.
There the in terms of making a living as a writer, unless you're writing, doing comprehensive writing for PhD students, or writing for a magazine or newspaper, there is no money in it at all. If I didn't edit for a living, if I didn't help people tell their stories, there would be no income. That's where the income comes from as a comprehensive or substantive editor. So I'm fortunate in that respect that that's where I can turn to for income. But still, when you write, you kind of write the story. You will tell the story you want to tell, but but regardless of what people say, if no one is reading it, then you may as well have not even published. Just fold it up, put it on the shelf, and every once in a while you can take
because
it down and read it again yourself.
you're paying for editors, you're paying for cover art, you're paying for a lot of, it's a very expensive hobby, is what it
Well,
comes
no, you're not
down.
if you're traditionally
Oh,
published
if
with,
you're traditionally
and I've
published,
been
no, that
fortunate.
also.
All three
Yeah,
books have,
and that is a biggie because very
yeah,
few people take people without agents now.
yeah,
They still want you to do all the promotions, and it's not just about writing a good book, it's writing a book that is on their publishing agenda for
that's
that
right.
year. What happens? So as much as I've seen people with amazing horror stories go to horror publishers, but it's not the type of horror they're into this year. You know, you may write about vampires, they're into werewolves. So all of these things make a difference when you're reaching out for this. I yeah, no, it's but I condone anyone that follows their dream, and so I'm going to help them have a voice if they can. And there are ways we can find different things out there. I know a certain ebook publisher, which will remain nameless, just had a fill your insert e-reader name here for free. And a lot of indie authors and things will put their works out there for free to get people to hear their voice, so that they know what they get. And I had sore fingers because I found out like 2 hours before it was shutting down for the day. And I'm like, I'm going to get these books because I have to know. And I went through two. And you don't have to read them all of the book. You know if it's going to suit you after a few pages or even 2 or 3 chapters. And then I found one that I totally fell in love with, which is the perfect Halloween read. And she will be on in October for the perfect Halloween read. So you don't know. I mean, books for the average person, books are becoming expensive. And so you can help out unknown people by doing something like that, and you get a lot to read along the ways, and that's how they choose to promote. So people are trying anything out there to get you to hear their words, read their words. And you wouldn't, like I said, if I wasn't experimental, I would never have read Reva's books. She also sent them in a lovely gift bag with tissue paper to my house through a friend, because that's another thing. Postage is getting very expensive for these things. And I have been delighted with each and every one of them. And I am just so blown away, Reva, by your ability with your characters, your honesty, and to take us into, like I said, these difficult emotional subjects and have us still have something. I haven't quite got the words for it yet, but something settle within ourselves that we will keep our eyes open and look at the world differently and not blame and judge and all of those other things. So
That's
you're
wonderful.
amazing.
Well, I gotta say, Vicky, I don't know how many people are watching or listening, but I would say that you're a rare breed, that doing what you do, giving a voice and a platform to writers and directors and people in the arts and in different aspects of the arts is just that people who are not yet Margaret Atwood or whomever, and the idea that you do this out of a love for the written word or the television program or the whatever it is that tells these incredible stories. The fact that you do this and put your heart and soul into this is exactly what we need. We need more. We have so many writers. We need people like you who care enough to 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 platform us, because it's the only way that people will know that we exist. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful. I think it's amazing what you do.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't think I can stop now. I mean, on those mornings I wake up and there's a list of things to do. I'm like, why are you doing this? But I just because it needs to be done. It needs to. I don't know. I love the world and I love the people in the world, but I think somehow we're losing something of that with all the artificialness and the lack of honesty, um oh, Robin says we are both doing something really special. So
That's really nice. That's really nice.
Robin, I'm sending you a card. I don't know where you live. I don't know Robin, but he shows up. So
Well, that's
he's
wonderful.
he's important. But as you know, as someone who read or watched television or whatever, for anybody who's had a difficult childhood or whatever, these books, these television shows, these whatever step in and help you understand a world that you may not have the ability to get out to and see. And this is just my thank you for those who went before and did that. Okay, Reba, we've got to bring in a joke here. Anyways, I'm telling you, when I was writing up your show that I threw in the garbage, when I was writing up your show, I had, for the first time in forever, this overwhelming need to listen to Defying Gravity from Wicked. So I've decided that is your song because aside from your books, no matter what happened, you weren't going to be told what to do. You held on to your integrity, and so that I think you're a perfect example for that in real life and in your writing.
So kind.
So that's your song. From now on, that I will think of. If I hear that song, I will think of you. So thank you so much for joining us today and for this great conversation. I should just throw out the paper more often. And you're always welcome back, even if we just want to talk about, I don't know what. This is my socializing time now, so even if we just want to talk. But our time is up, so I have to say goodbye and take care of yourself, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Robin. Whoever you are, I am very, very thrilled that you tuned in.
Somewhere up in northern Winnipeg. I think he's out west in that world. So he yeah. Thank you, Robin. Okay, you take care. And I have to all right, and I'm going to close up the comments because Robin's comment was perfect. So, and go over to the music here. There we go. You can't see that. I don't know why I tell you these things, but just if you're wondering, where did Vicky go? So, next week, Janice Barrett will be returning. You'll remember she was here with her historical suspense novel, Authorized Cruelty, and thriller novel. And she's going to be back with a new one this week, Cash for Life. And I would call it a suspense thriller as well. Not always sure these genres mix and match. But until then, may your coffee be hot and your story sweet. Thanks for listening, everyone.